He said I always think I'm right, but I was just tired of being blamed. Before we begin, please like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Let's all be internet friends. It wasn't about winning. Not really. It was about surviving. That's what I kept telling myself long after the words, "You always think you're right, Isla," had become a familiar refrain in our apartment. With Drew, every simple disagreement, every misunderstanding, inevitably spiraled into a referendum on my character. I was too proud, too logical. I always had to be right. But what he called being right, I called understanding. What he saw as a desire to win, I felt as a desperate need to be understood, to explain, to clarify. I didn't want to be right. I just wanted to stop being the problem. And I was exhausted from trying to prove I wasn't. He said it like it was a flaw. Like the fact that I had something to say, calmly, clearly, was an act of war. We were sitting in the living room, late evening, that stale space between dinner and sleep where most of our fights happened. Not yelling, never yelling, just edge. I had brought up something small, the trash. It always started with something small. I asked if he could stop tossing recyclables into the regular bin. That's all. I even laughed a little when I said it, trying to keep it light, but his face hardened. He turned off the TV and looked at me like I'd insulted his entire lineage. "You always have a comeback," he muttered. I asked, "What do you mean?" "There's always a reason. You always have something to say." I sat there, holding my breath like exhaling would make it worse. I wasn't arguing, I was just. "Exactly," he cut in, "justifying. You always justify everything. You can't ever just let it go." I remember staring at the floor, at the pattern in the rug, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. Was I supposed to say nothing? Was I supposed to smile and throw the milk carton in myself again? I could feel the shift. The way the room closed in. The way he positioned himself as the victim in a conversation about trash. "I just wanted to explain," I said, quieter this time. He scoffed. "There's always a reason with you." Like that was some kind of indictment. That was the first time I realized our arguments weren't about problems. They were about roles. He wanted me to shrink, to surrender, to let him be the one who dictated what mattered and what didn't. And if I didn't, if I had a reason, an idea, a truth he hadn't considered, then I was always trying to win. But I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to live in peace. I was trying to be heard. I was trying to exist without tiptoeing around a man who confused volume with validity and silence with respect. I watched him get up and leave the room. He didn't slam the door. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he walked into the bedroom, left the lights on behind him, and closed the door gently. Like he was the one who'd been hurt. Like I had done something wrong by speaking. That night, I sat in the kitchen with a glass of water and a full heartache. I didn't cry. I just kept thinking about that line. "There's always a reason with you." Yes, there is. Because I'm tired of being blamed for existing with logic. Tired of walking into every disagreement already on trial. Tired of needing permission to be reasonable. I wasn't trying to win. I was just tired of losing myself. I let him win on purpose. I started doing it quietly, folding my thoughts before they had the chance to unfold. It didn't feel like surrender at first, more like strategy. If I just nodded, if I just softened, if I didn't push too hard, maybe the conversation wouldn't spiral. Maybe we could get through one night without that bitter silence. The kind where he'd sit on the edge of the bed scrolling on his phone, ignoring me completely, making it clear that my voice had once again stepped too far. The first time I said, "You're right," when I knew he wasn't, it left a bitter taste in my mouth. We were talking about money, something stupid, like why I wanted to keep a small emergency fund separate from our shared account. He said it made him feel like I didn't trust him, like I was preparing for the end. I said it was just a habit, something I'd always done. He said, "Well, if you don't think we're solid, say that." I looked at him, hands clenched under the table, and said, "You're right." He smiled. That smile stayed with me for hours, not because it made me feel good, but because I knew what it cost. After that, it got easier. Or maybe it just got quieter. I stopped offering counterpoints. Stopped adding nuance. If he said something about my tone, I changed it. If he said I misunderstood him, I nodded. Even when I hadn't. Especially when I hadn't. There were days I replayed entire conversations in my head after he went to sleep, trying to figure out where it all tipped, trying to understand how we went from easy to eggshells. I used to speak with confidence. I used to be able to say, "I disagree," without the fear of being iced out for 3 days. Now, I measured every sentence. I caught myself one night, sitting on the bathroom floor, drafting a text to him about why I'd withdrawn some money from our account to help my sister with a bill. I was explaining it like I'd stolen from him, justifying it in paragraphs. And somewhere between rewriting the third sentence and deleting the whole thing, I realized something gutting. I wasn't adjusting to avoid hurting him. I was adjusting to avoid punishment. That wasn't love. That was survival, and survival doesn't leave room for peace. I didn't feel like I was in a relationship anymore. I felt like I was being managed, observed, rated. And the quieter I became, the more I started to believe that maybe I was the problem. That maybe love was supposed to look like this, all edge and eggshells and apology. But something deep in me, the part that used to speak freely, whispered, "This isn't it." He said I talk like a lawyer. That was his favorite jab when I tried to explain myself, when I dared to bring facts into a fight that had already been judged. "You're always prepared," he muttered once, halfway through an argument about groceries of all things. "Like you rehearsed this." I hadn't, I was just tired of being misunderstood, tired of watching my words be twisted, tired of feeling like clarity was a weapon and not a bridge. So yes, I came prepared. I learned how to stack my points like building blocks, neat and airtight, because I thought maybe, just maybe, if I made enough sense, he'd stop blaming me, stop accusing me of trying to win. But in his eyes, logic became arrogance. Calm became cruelty, and my clarity, a red flag. That night, we were arguing about how often I worked late. He said it felt like I was choosing my job over him, that I made time for everyone but him. I said, "You've never said anything before." He shrugged. "Because when I do, you come back with bullet points." As if being thoughtful was an attack. I remember standing in the kitchen, gripping the counter with one hand, trying to decide whether to defend myself or let him feel victorious. I chose silence, and that seemed to enrage him even more. "You're doing it again," he snapped, looking at me like you're smarter than me. I wasn't looking at him like that. I was just trying not to cry. I'd learned early on that tears shifted the blame, that the moment I cried, I became dramatic, manipulative, too emotional to be rational, so I held it in. I got good at that, locking my face until my jaw ached, nodding at things I didn't agree with, swallowing rebuttals whole. But that night I cracked, not loudly, not with yelling or accusations, just a whisper, just 5 words. "That's not what I said." And he lost it. "Doesn't matter," he said, eyes dark. "It's how you said it." That sentence sank deeper than any insult. It told me everything. That truth didn't matter. That intention didn't matter. That he had already decided who I was, and no amount of calm, clear explanation would change it. I went to bed that night curled up on the very edge of the mattress, staring at the wall like it had answers. He didn't touch me, didn't apologize, just rolled over, phone in hand, like nothing had happened. I remember thinking, if I have to shrink this much to be loved, then maybe this isn't love at all. Maya saw it happen in real time, the way I swallowed a truth whole just to keep the room from shifting. It was during game night at her place. A cozy evening, wine, laughter. A few of our friends gathered around the table. Drew had just finished telling a story, one that involved me, or at least, a version of me I didn't recognize. He said I'd forgotten our anniversary once, that I'd made it up to him by planning a weekend getaway. Everyone laughed, nudging me, calling me romantic. But the truth was, he'd forgotten. I'd planned the trip just to soften the bruise. He was the one who said he hated Hallmark holidays, remember? I sat there, glass in hand, letting the story play out, my name attached to the fiction, my silence stapled to the lie. Maya caught my eye across the table. Her smile dimmed just a little. She didn't say anything right then, but later, when I was helping her clear the glasses, she asked, "Why didn't you correct him?" I shrugged, rinsing a cup that didn't need rinsing. "What's the point?" I mumbled. She didn't press, just nodded slowly. But her silence was louder than any advice. She wasn't judging me, just mourning the version of me that used to speak up. On the way home, Drew squeezed my thigh in the car like everything was fine. told me the night went well, asked if I had fun. I said yes, of course. That's what you do when it's easier to pretend. But deep down, something inside me felt bruised. Not because of the story, not even because of the lie, but because I didn't flinch when he told it. I didn't even try to stop it. I was becoming fluent in omission. At work the next day, Maya sent me a message. Just one sentence. You used to fact-check the whole world. Now you're letting him rewrite you. I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. And even then, I only typed back, I'm just tired. It wasn't a lie, I was tired. But not in the sleepy, overworked way. I was tired of fighting for truth inside a relationship that couldn't hold it. Tired of making space for his discomfort while shrinking my reality to fit his ego. I used to think compromise meant meeting someone halfway. Now it just felt like I was walking further and further into silence and calling it peace. Even Drew's best friend started noticing. Not in a dramatic way, just small things. The way my eyes would scan the floor instead of meeting his when conversations got heavy. The way I'd pause before answering simple questions, like I was mentally running through a checklist. Is this too sharp? Too confident? Too correct. We were out one night, a double date with Theo and his girlfriend at a small rooftop bar. The kind of place where everything felt easy. I remember ordering a cocktail I liked, the same one I'd always ordered. And when the drinks arrived, Drew said, half laughing, "Oh, she only gets that one when she's stressed. You can always tell." I laughed too, because that's what I was supposed to do. Theo didn't. He looked at me for a second, just long enough. And something passed between us. Not romantic, not dramatic, just awareness. Later, when Drew stepped away to take a call, Theo leaned over and said softly, "You used to push back more. Now you just nod." "That's not you." I stared at him, unsure how to answer. Because how do you explain that you've become a softer shape just to avoid being broken? That every "you're right" is a shield, not a concession. That the woman they knew, sharp, articulate, unafraid to stand her ground, had slowly disappeared, not in a storm, but in a drought? I didn't say any of that. I just smiled and said, "I'm tired." He didn't press, just nodded like Maya had. On the walk home, Drew asked if I thought Theo had always been this opinionated. I said, maybe he just notices things. Drew didn't reply, but he walked a little faster. That night, in bed, I stared at the ceiling while Drew scrolled on his phone beside me. I thought about how many times I'd held my breath in our conversations. How many times I'd turned a thought into a whisper or let it die in my throat completely. And I realized the scariest part wasn't that I was losing my voice. It was that he didn't even notice. He said I made him feel dumb. It was after something simple, too simple. We were rearranging the living room, and I'd suggested moving the bookshelf to the far wall. I said, gently, it might balance the room better this way. We've got a lot of light coming in from that window and the reflection on the TV. He cut me off. You always do that, he snapped. Talk like you're the expert, like you've researched every angle and I'm just standing here waiting to be taught. I blinked. I was just explaining why I thought. He didn't let me finish. It's not what you said, it's how you said it. That was always the line, never the content, always the tone. I wasn't allowed to be too soft because then I was being manipulative. I wasn't allowed to be too firm because then I was being condescending. I wasn't allowed to disagree because disagreement to Drew was rebellion. A challenge, a threat. That evening, I said nothing more. I helped move the bookshelf to where he wanted it. Watched him fumble with wires and placements. Watched him sigh when the glare hit exactly where I'd said it would. He didn't acknowledge it. He just kept working. And I just kept quiet. But inside, something started breaking. Not a dramatic shatter, just a soft hairline crack. A quiet realization that no matter how I spoke, it would always be wrong. That there was no right tone when someone is already committed to misunderstanding you. Later that night, I journaled a single sentence. I am tired of adjusting the volume of my truth to make someone else feel comfortable in their lie. And I meant it. Dr. Lorne paused. It was subtle, barely a beat longer than usual. But in that stillness, I felt seen for the first time in weeks. We were mid-session, sitting in that quiet, softly lit room that smelled like eucalyptus and wood polish. I had just finished a short sentence. Just one. I had said, when he raised his voice last week, I asked if we could talk when things felt calmer. That's all. Drew jumped in right after. His voice didn't rise, but it grew full of rationalizations, full of rewrites. She's always redirecting, always making herself sound measured so I look like the problem. She edits the story to make herself sound like a monk and me like I lost control. He went on for 5 minutes, interrupted himself twice to correct how I actually said something, described how it made him feel, what he assumed I meant, what he believes I do subconsciously. Not once did he look at me. I stared at the rug the whole time, that ugly brown-end cream spiral under the coffee table. I didn't cry. I didn't blink too hard. I just listened to someone build a version of me that only made sense if you stripped away everything I ever said with love. And when he was done, I looked up. Slowly, not to him, to Dr. Lorne. That's when she paused. Then she adjusted her pen on the notepad and said calmly, "Let's go back to Isla's point." Drew's jaw twitched. She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, but I knew what it meant. She'd heard it too, the spiral, the story shifting, the emotional avalanche that buries the original point. She didn't call it manipulation. She didn't have to, she just brought the room back to me. I nodded. And for the first time, I didn't rephrase, I didn't shrink. I didn't soften. I said, "I want peace, not power. That's all I've ever wanted." And the silence that followed felt like truth finally had a place to land. Rachel promoted me last week. It was a quiet announcement, no email blast, no company-wide meeting. Just a short one-on-one in her office, after a presentation I led on restructuring client onboarding. She waited until I finished gathering my notes, then said, "Before you go, I've been meaning to talk to you about something." I froze for a second, like I always do now when someone pauses. It's a habit I've picked up, bracing. But then she smiled and continued, "You've stepped up this year, not just with the work, but with the way you make people feel heard. That's leadership." I don't remember what I said in response. Probably something small like, "Thank you." Maybe I smiled. Maybe I didn't. What I do remember is walking out of her office and into the hallway and having to stop near the stairwell because my eyes burned too suddenly to ignore. It wasn't the promotion, it was the sentence, "You make people feel heard." At home, I'm the one repeating myself, rewording everything, explaining my intentions like I'm a defendant in court. I don't make Drew feel heard, I make him feel challenged. And the difference between those two things, I'm realizing, has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with how he sees clarity, how he sees me. Later that evening, when I told him, I tried to keep it light. I didn't want to make it a big deal. He barely looked up from his phone. "So you're a manager now?" "Yeah," I said softly. "Rachel gave me the title officially. I'll be leading the account restructure." He nodded. "Well, just don't let it go to your head." Then went back to scrolling. "No congratulations. No, I'm proud of you. Just a quiet warning, don't let it go to your head." It was the same tone he used when I laughed too hard in public, or when I shared a strong opinion at dinner with friends. As if confidence from me was a threat, not a trait. But Rachel saw it differently. She saw leadership, presence, the very things I've been taught to dim. And for the first time, I let myself believe her. He called that arrogance too. I didn't bring up the promotion again. But he did 3 days later, while we were brushing our teeth, standing side by side in the bathroom like we'd done 100 times before. He spit, wiped his mouth, and said casually, "You've been acting different since that manager title." I paused. "Different how?" "You know, confident, like you think you're smarter than me or something." I blinked. "I never said that." "You don't have to," he said, shrugging. "It's in your tone." I didn't respond. Because how do you explain that you've spent years shrinking, that this confidence wasn't arrogance, it was oxygen? How do you say this version of me isn't new, it's just finally free? I walked out of the bathroom and into the bedroom. He followed. "See," he added, "that silence is what I'm talking about." I almost laughed. He used to say I talked too much. Now the silence was arrogance too. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation, searching for the invisible crime, but all I had done was accept a promotion. And he made it sound like a betrayal. The next morning at work, Rachel pulled me aside again. "I know it's early, but we're sending your name in for the leadership summit this quarter," she said. "You're a natural communicator." It took everything in me not to cry on the spot. Because at home, that same skill was a problem. At home, being articulate made me cold. At home, calm was mistaken for cruelty. But in that office, it was clarity, strength, value. I thanked her and walked back to my desk, not just proud, but confused. How could two people see the same woman so differently? And then I remembered Maya's voice, weeks ago, when I told her how Drew said I was too logical. That's what people say when they can't twist what you said. I left our conversations feeling small. Not always in the moment, sometimes I even thought we were making progress. But afterward, in the quiet of my own head, I would start picking apart what I'd said, what I could have reworded, what I should have softened. It became a pattern. Drew would walk away feeling victorious, and I would sit alone trying to reverse engineer the moment I went wrong. Except I hadn't. Because when I went back through those conversations, when I replayed them silently, sometimes mouthing the words to myself like lines in a script, I found something alarming. I hadn't raised my voice, I hadn't insulted him, I hadn't even interrupted. And still, somehow, I ended up the one apologizing. There was one night that made it clear. We were talking about money, not even arguing, just discussing. I had suggested a different budget for our trip because I'd gotten a clearer picture of my expenses. He sighed, a long, dramatic exhale, then said, "Every time we talk about money, you act like you know everything. It's like you don't think I can contribute anything useful." That wasn't what I said. It wasn't even close. But before I could defend myself, I stopped. Because I knew what would happen if I pushed back. He'd turn it into a war over tone or intent or my inability to admit fault. So I swallowed it, said, "Okay." He relaxed immediately, put his arm around me like we hadn't just had a disagreement that he lit and walked away from. I stared at the wall behind his head and thought, this isn't love. This is emotional weightlifting. Every word felt like it came with a cost. Every truth had to be taxed. And no matter how gentle I was, the receipt always came back with my name on it. That was when I started to wonder if the problem wasn't how I was speaking. Maybe the problem was that I was speaking at all. Maya had the word for it. We were sitting on her balcony, the sun just low enough to turn everything gold, and I must have looked tired, not physically, but in that way your soul shows through your posture. I was telling her about the last argument, how I'd said something small, something honest, and Drew turned it into a personal attack. She didn't interrupt, just let me talk until I ran out of breath. When I stopped, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He's gaslighting you, Isla." I blinked. The word felt too dramatic, too clinical, but it hung in the air, unshaken. "I don't think so," I replied too quickly. "It's not like he's calling me crazy or lying outright." Maya leaned forward. "That's not all gaslighting is. It's not just about lies. It's about slowly convincing someone that their feelings, their memory, their perception aren't real. And you second-guess yourself so much now it's like watching a genius apologize for breathing." I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it, because the truth was I had stopped trusting myself, not just around Drew, but everywhere. I hesitated before giving feedback at work. I flinched when my phone rang. I replayed conversations in my head, wondering if I came off too harsh or too cold or too me. I used to speak with ease. Now every sentence had a preamble. "Sorry, I might be wrong, but..." "Just my opinion, but..." "Tell me if I'm overthinking." I looked at Maya and realized she hadn't seen me like that before Drew. And I hadn't seen it happening either, not until I stood in front of someone who remembered my voice as it used to be. "You're not the problem," she said softly. "You've been trying to keep peace with someone who only feels powerful when you're quiet." I didn't cry, but something in me cracked. Because for the first time, someone had named the thing I couldn't. And it didn't sound like pride or stubbornness or being too logical. It sounded like survival. Eva sat me down in the cafe where we used to meet as couples. She looked nervous, fidgeting with the sleeve of her cardigan, but her eyes were steady when they met mine. "I know this might be out of line," she began, "but I need to say something before you go." I hadn't even told her I was leaving yet. She sipped her coffee, then placed the cup down carefully like she was bracing herself. "He does it to me too," she said. I didn't move. "He used to do it when we were kids," she continued. "If I said something he didn't like, he'd twist it, make me feel like I was being mean or ungrateful." I thought I was the problem for years. I figured it was just older brother stuff. But then I saw him with you, and I realized it's not about birth order, it's about control. My fingers tightened around my mug. Eva had always been kind but cautious. She loved her brother, defended him in the smallest ways. To hear her say this out loud meant she had been watching, feeling it. "He needs to be right," she said, "even if it costs him everything." Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes looked pained. "And you were the first person who could match him, not because you argued, but because you made sense, you explained yourself. You asked him to listen, and that threatened him more than any shouting ever could." I didn't speak. I just stared at the steam rising between us, thinking about how many nights I spent trying to rewrite arguments in my head. How many times I asked myself if I was too blunt, too rigid, too emotionally detached. But hearing it from her, someone who had grown up alongside him, felt like pulling back a curtain I didn't know was there. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner." I gave her the smallest nod, not out of resentment but understanding. Sometimes we all see things too late. Sometimes we don't have the words until someone else speaks them first. When we stood to leave, she hugged me tightly. "You deserve ease," she whispered, "not eggshells." And for the first time in years, I believed her. I tried silence. Not as a tactic, not as a punishment, just as a pause. I stopped defending myself. I stopped breaking my words down into bite-sized pieces he could swallow without choking on them. I stopped trying to make everything sound softer than it felt. It didn't go well. The first time I stayed quiet during a disagreement, he tilted his head like I'd just said something offensive. "Oh," he muttered, "so now you think you're better than me." I blinked. That wasn't what I said. I hadn't said anything. But apparently silence had a tone, a posture, an accusation, and in his world my stillness was smugness. My breath was arrogance. My calm was cruelty. He followed me into the kitchen later that night, pacing behind me while I rinsed a glass. "You're really not gonna say anything?" he asked. "You always have something to say." I dried the glass slowly, placing it back in the cupboard. "You know what this feels like, right?" he added. "Like you're trying to punish me." Still, I didn't respond. He hated it. The way I no longer unraveled on cue. The way my silence didn't tremble with fear or desperation. It was firm, boring, unshakable. Eventually, he said, "You think being quiet makes you mature. It just makes you cold." But it wasn't coldness. It was exhaustion. It was peace dressed in armor. And if he couldn't hear the difference, I wasn't going to explain it anymore. Theo had been quiet for months, always loyal to Drew, always giving him the benefit of the doubt. But something shifted the night we all sat around Maya and Miles's dining table playing charades. I made a joke, something small, about Drew forgetting to pick up the wine. It wasn't biting. It wasn't serious. But the way he looked at me, that split second of narrowed eyes and tightened jaw, it said more than words ever could. He laughed it off, of course, but the air around the table changed. Slightly, sharply. Later, as everyone gathered their things to leave, Theo lingered by the doorway. Drew had already stepped outside, fumbling with the car keys. Theo looked at me for a long second, then said quietly, "You know he's not arguing. He's controlling the narrative." I froze. It was the first time someone had said it aloud, that it wasn't just conflict, that it wasn't just communication styles, that it was control wrapped in logic, framed as fairness. Drew always needed to win, but he was never playing fair. Theo didn't wait for my response. He just nodded once, like someone acknowledging a truth you'd been living in, and followed Drew to the car. I stood there by the co-track for a long time, holding my purse and the echo of his words. And for the first time in forever, I didn't feel crazy. I felt seen. Theo stayed after the others left, said he forgot his wallet, but I think he just needed a moment without Drew around. I was clearing plates, trying not to think too hard about how little space I took up that night, how often I'd looked to Drew before answering even the simplest questions. Theo stood by the kitchen doorway for a while, eyes low, thumb tracing the leather of his wallet. Then he said quietly, "You know, he doesn't argue, he just controls the narrative." I stopped mid-step, turned to face him. "He talks in circles," Theo continued, "until it sounds like your opinion is a personal attack. And if you try to defend yourself, he flips it, makes you the one who's harsh." angry, arrogant. I said nothing, I didn't need to. The weight of my silence was answer enough. Theo shook his head. He's my best friend, but I see it now. You used to have a presence. Now it's like you're managing yourself, even in your own home. It stung, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. He hesitated, then added, "You don't have to keep shrinking to prove you're not difficult. You're not the problem." He left without saying anything else, just nodded once and pulled the door shut behind him. The room felt heavier after, like all the unspoken things in our relationship had finally been acknowledged out loud by someone other than me. I sat on the couch, letting those words echo in the quiet. He's not arguing. He's controlling the narrative. And for the first time, I believed it because someone else had finally seen it too. He said I was leaving because I couldn't handle criticism. The way he said it, calm, almost clinical, made it sound like a diagnosis. Like I was broken in some way for not wanting to stay in a relationship where every disagreement ended with me apologizing for existing. I stood by the doorway with my coat in one hand and my dignity in the other, watching him pace the living room like the victim in a story he kept rewriting. "I just think it's sad," he said, "that instead of working through things like adults, you run the moment someone challenges you." I blinked slowly, trying not to let the frustration win. "This isn't about challenge, Drew. It's about being blamed every time I breathe wrong." He scoffed. "Oh, come on, Isla, you always twist it into some performance." I took a breath, steady. "I'm not leaving because I can't handle feedback. I'm leaving because I'm tired of explaining why I'm not the villain." That stopped him just for a moment. His mouth opened slightly like he had a retort ready, but it never came, just silence. Thick and sharp, I didn't wait for a goodbye. I didn't give him a speech. I just picked up the last of my boxes and walked out. Because the truth is, when someone needs you to be the problem just to feel like they're the solution, no amount of calm, love, or logic will save you. And I was done being his scapegoat. Rachel wrote my reference letter like she'd been waiting years to say what I hadn't found the words for. It arrived in my inbox with no fanfare, no subject line, just a PDF titled "For You." I opened it in the quiet of my half-packed apartment, surrounded by boxes of books and a silence that finally felt like mine. "Alina communicates with clarity and calm," it began, my legal name, but her voice made it sound personal. "It's her greatest strength. She leads without overpowering, questions without undermining, and creates space for others to rise." I stopped reading halfway through and cried. Not because of the words, but because someone had seen me, fully, without suspicion, without resentment. Rachel hadn't just described my skills, she described my effort, my intention. Everything I'd tried to be and everything Drew had used against me. He once said my clarity was arrogance. That my calm made him feel small. That I talked like I was trying to win a debate, not express a feeling. But here was someone else, someone who had no emotional agenda, calling those exact traits a strength. I sat with that for a long time, let it soak in. Let it rebuild a part of me I hadn't realized was still shaking. Later that night, I printed it out. Not because I needed it for the job, they already knew who I was, but because I wanted a copy to keep. To remind myself that my voice was never the problem. He said I'd regret it. The words came through a voice note I didn't ask for, hours after I blocked his number. He used an email to get it to me, a throwaway account he must have made just to say it without saying anything real. "Good luck finding someone who puts up with you," he ended, with that familiar smirk in his tone. Like this was still a chess match, like I was losing something by walking away. I played it once, then deleted it. There was nothing left to regret. I didn't miss the tension in my chest every time we disagreed. I didn't miss measuring my tone like a courtroom transcript. I didn't miss the way his praise only came when I bent, when I agreed, stayed quiet, or softened myself into something he could handle. He wanted a mirror, not a partner. Someone who reflected him back in the light he needed. And when I showed up with my own light, my own words, my own voice, he called it combat. But it wasn't. It was survival. And now I didn't need survival tactics. I needed space. I needed softness. I needed peace that didn't come with conditions. So no, I didn't regret it. Not even a little. Maya helped me unpack like it was a ritual, not just for boxes, but for all the pieces of myself I'd folded away to keep someone else comfortable. She brought coffee, And that mug I once joked about in passing, the one that said, "Being right isn't a crime." I laughed when I saw it from the belly and she said, "There she is." We took our time, no rush, no checklist, just slow sorting, deciding what came with me into this next chapter and what got left behind. She asked where I wanted the bookshelf and I said, "Wherever the light hits in the morning." She grinned. "So we're romanticizing again. Good." We paused in the middle of the kitchen, still barefoot, surrounded by half-sealed boxes, and I realized I hadn't apologized once. Not for taking up space, not for having opinions, not for laughing too loud or needing help. Maya noticed too. "Feels weird, doesn't it?" she said, "to just be without the need to soften first." I nodded. But good weird. Later that night, I stood in my new bedroom with the window open and the city humming below me. No echo of his criticism in the air. No silent accusations waiting behind the next sentence. Just me and breath. And peace. I was still learning how to hold that, but at least now I had the room to try. Eva's message came in while I was folding laundry, a quiet Sunday task that had somehow become meditative. Her name lit up my screen with a simple, "Can I call?" I hesitated for half a second, then typed, "Sure." Her voice was softer than I remembered, measured. I wanted to say I'm sorry," she began. "I should have said something sooner. I saw what he was doing to you, and I didn't know how to help without making it worse." I sat on the edge of the bed, the warmth of fresh towels in my lap, and listened. She kept going. "He's my brother, but he's not easy. And it's not just you, it's everyone. He twists things, needs to be right more than he needs to be kind." I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. She filled the silence with truth. "Watching you leave, it made me realize I've been doing the same thing. Shrinking around him, around other people too, but especially him." When I finally spoke, I said, "You saw me, that's more than most." And I meant it. Because there was something sacred in being witnessed. In someone naming the thing you carried before you even dropped it. We didn't talk long, but the call stayed with me. It didn't fix everything. It didn't need to. It just reminded me I wasn't crazy. And that was enough. I speak clearly now, without disclaimers. Without tiptoeing around the possibility that my words might bruise someone's ego. It's a different kind of freedom, not loud or showy, just mine. At work, I explained a complex proposal during a meeting. No stumbles, no caveats, just clarity. When I finished, someone said, "Thanks for explaining that so well." And I smiled. Not the kind of smile that seeks approval, but the kind that comes from knowing I'd honored myself in the process. Later that day, I answered a stranger's question in line at the bookstore. Direct, warm, unapologetic. They nodded and moved on, and I realized I hadn't rehearsed a single word. No internal edits, no self-monitoring. Just a response, clean, honest, whole. Even with friends, the shift was clear. I laughed louder, took up more space, told stories without wondering if I sounded too much. And when I disagreed, I said so, kindly, firmly, without bracing for backlash. There was no flinching now, no double-checking my tone, no apologizing for being articulate, no shrinking, just voice. And finally, peace. Thank you for watching. Please do not forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. I love you all.